Unsuitable for children, the clerk read aloud, and the word hung in the air of that small agency office, like smoke from a greenwood fire. Alice Marin stood very still. She had heard worse. She had survived worse. But the word still landed somewhere below her ribs, and she pressed her hands together at her waist, the way her mother had taught her to do when she wanted to strike something and could not afford to. The clerk, a thin man with pince-nez spectacles and ink-stained fingers, slid the paper back across the counter without meeting her eyes. The agency seal was stamped at the top, a proud eagle, and the notation was written in a careful, unhurried hand, as if the person who had written it had wanted to be thorough. Unsuitable for children, as though Alice were a blunt tool shelved in the wrong drawer. She picked up the form and folded it once along its crease and put it in her coat pocket. She did not argue. There was no one to argue with. The clerk had not written the notation. The previous placement family, the Dunhams of Boise City, had written it, after Alice had told their 11-year-old boy plainly and without apology that the word he had used for the Chinese cook was not permitted in her presence, and that if he used it again, she would tell his father. He had used it again, she had told his father. The father had sided with the boy. The agency had sided with the father. And so Alice stood in the autumn of 1889, in a small office in Silver City, Idaho, with a folded form in her pocket, and nothing much else to her name. She stepped out onto the boardwalk. The wind off the canyon was cold and smelled of pine resin and coming rain. She had $4.30. She had a traveling trunk at the depot. She had, the agency woman had mentioned with some reluctance before Alice left the inner office, one remaining inquiry. A man named Gideon Holt, out on the Sable Creek Road, who had written twice asking for a housekeeper and had not been matched because he was a widower with a small child, and the agency felt he required someone with demonstrated experience. Someone suitable. Alice breathed the pine-scented air. She asked for the direction of the Sable Creek Road. The clerk's assistant, a young woman with kind eyes who had said nothing during the whole preceding interview, wrote it down on a scrap of paper and pressed it into Alice's hand without a word. Alice thanked her and walked toward the livery. She could hear, behind her as she went, the clerk saying something to someone in a low voice. She did not turn around. She had learned a long time ago that you cannot change what people say when your back is turned. You can only keep walking. She kept walking. The road to Sable Creek was 4 miles of rutted red clay that wound down out of the canyon proper and spread into a wide, flat valley ringed by dark pines. Alice rode in the back of a supply wagon whose driver asked no questions and whistled hymns tunelessly the entire way, which she found more comforting than conversation would have been. The valley, when she reached it, was wide and pale gold in the autumn light, the grass gone dry, and the cottonwoods along the creek burning yellow. Someone had planted a kitchen garden alongside the main house. She could see the dried stakes and the bare mounded beds from the gate, and the garden had been abandoned sometime around midsummer, from the look of it. The house itself was solid. That was the first thing she noted professionally, the way another woman might have noted a man's jaw or his eyes. It was a 2-room log structure, with a covered porch and a stone chimney, and someone had started a second-room addition on the east side and left it half-framed, the raw lumber silver gray with weathering. There was a barn, a well, a woodpile that was well begun but not sufficient for winter. There were chickens in the yard and a bay horse in the paddock, and no person in sight. Alice climbed down from the wagon, thanked the driver, and carried her smaller bag to the porch. She knocked. Nothing. She knocked again, 3 firm raps, the kind that said she meant to be heard. A child's voice came from inside, high and clear as a struck bell.
"Papa is in the barn."
Alice looked at the barn. She looked back at the door. She said, through the closed planks, "Are you alone in there?" "Yes," said the voice. Then, after a pause, "I am not supposed to open the door." That is a very good rule, Alice said. I approve of it entirely. I will go find your papa. She found Gideon Holt in the barn, repairing a cracked singletree with rawhide, and a patience that radiated off him, the way warmth radiates off stone that has been in the sun all day. He was a tall man, lean in the way that came from hard work and not enough sitting down, with dark hair worn a little long and a jaw that carried 3 or 4 days of beard the color of iron filings. His hands were large and competent. He did not look up when she came in. I am not buying anything, he said. I am not selling anything, Alice said. My name is Alice Marin. The agency in Silver City sent me. He looked up then. His eyes were gray, a flat, steady gray like creek water in November, and they took in the whole of her in one practiced assessment, without being rude about it. They said they had no one to send. They said they had one remaining inquiry, Alice said. Yours. He set down the singletree. He wiped his hands on a rag. They also said, he told her carefully, that the woman they might send had a notation on her file. Alice reached into her coat pocket and produced the folded form. She held it out. He took it. He read it. He handed it back. The Dunhams, he said. It was not a question. You know them. I know of them. He picked up the singletree again, turned it in his hands. Cecil Dunham's boy is 11 years old and mean as a stepped-on snake, and Cecil Dunham lets him be. He set the singletree down a second time and looked at her directly. What are your terms? Alice had thought about this on the wagon ride down. Room and board and $3 a month, she said. I will cook, clean, tend the garden if you want one, replant it before the ground freezes, and keep the house in order through winter. I will not be mistreated, and I will not be lied to. I will give you 90 days before either of us decides anything further. He was quiet for a moment. The bay horse moved in its stall. Outside, a chicken complained about something with great feeling. There is the matter of my daughter, Gideon said. She is 4 years old. She has opinions. Most people worth knowing do, Alice said. He almost smiled. It was not quite a smile, more the idea of one passing across his face and deciding not to stay. Her name is May. I know, Alice said. She told me not to open the door, through it, while I was on the porch. I found it encouraging. This time something did settle into the lines around his eyes, something that was not a smile, but was adjacent to relief. He put out his hand. She shook it. His grip was firm and honest, the grip of a man who meant what it said. Supper's at 6, he told her. I'll show you the house. He did not tell her, not that evening, that the agency had written him as well, that they had described the available placements and noted, gently but clearly, that given his situation, a widower, a small child, a remote property, they recommended he consider a marriage arrangement rather than a housekeeper position, as housekeepers had a way of not staying through the winter. He did not tell her that he had written back twice, saying a housekeeper was what he needed, and a housekeeper was what he intended to have, because the last thing Gideon Holt intended was to bring a woman into his house, under terms that weren't fair to either of them. He also did not tell her that he had been 6 months behind on the housework, and that May had been eating bread and salt pork for 3 days, because he had forgotten to make anything else. May herself appeared at the kitchen doorway as Alice was shown in, and she stood there in her worn flannel dress and her 2 brown braids and her bare feet, the socks somewhere unknown, as 4-year-old socks always were. And she looked at Alice with her father's gray eyes and her mother's chin, and an expression of absolute judicial assessment. You are the lady, May said. I am a lady, Alice said. Whether I am your lady remains to be seen. What is your opinion of cornbread? May considered this with appropriate gravity. I like it with honey. Then we agree on something already, Alice said, and went to find the cornmeal. Gideon stood in the kitchen doorway and watched this exchange with the careful stillness of a man who has learned not to want things too much in case they disappear. The house still smelled of absence, of a woman gone too long ago and missed too quietly. There were things missing that he had stopped seeing because he looked at them every day. The second chair at the table that had been pushed to the wall, the curtains that had come down in a windstorm in the spring and not gone back up, the shelf he had meant to build beside the hearth and hadn't. Alice noticed all of it. She said nothing yet. She found the cornmeal, and she found the skillet, and she built up the fire in the cook stove with a competence that was neither showy nor apologetic, and she fed his daughter, and she fed him, and when supper was done she washed the dishes herself, and set them to dry, and asked Gideon, without ceremony, where she was meant to sleep. He had put a cot in the lean-to storeroom. It was clean and had blankets. Alice looked at it without expression, noted that there was a peg on the wall for her coat and a hook for her bag, and said that it would do. She did not say it was cold. It was cold. She heard May through the log wall, asking her father something in a whisper, too low to make out. She heard Gideon answer, low and careful. She did not try to hear what they said. She lay down on the cot and looked at the ceiling and listened to the wind come down off the ridge, and she thought, 90 days. That was the length of the bargain. That was what she had said. She did not let herself think about what came after. In the morning she was up before dawn and had coffee on and biscuits in the pan before Gideon came in from checking the livestock. He stopped in the kitchen doorway the way he had the night before, with that same quality of stillness, as though warmth and order in a room were things he had to brace himself against before he could enter them. He sat down. He drank the coffee. He said, "The biscuits are good." "Thank you," Alice said. She was already making a mental list of what the kitchen lacked and what could wait until spring and what could not. "Your woodpile will not see you through January. I know. Your garden beds could be got in before the ground hardens if someone turned them this week." "I know that too," he said, and he was not irritated, only honest. "I have not had the hours." "You will have the hours now," she said, not unkindly. "That is what I am here for." He looked at her over the rim of the tin cup, and she held the look steadily, and after a moment he nodded, once, and went back to his coffee. May came in from the bedroom in her nightgown and her 2 lopsided braids. She had redone them herself in the night, Alice suspected, and redone them badly. And she climbed into her chair and looked at the biscuits and then at Alice with an expression of cautious hope. "Honey?" she said. Alice put the jar on the table. May smiled, and it was the kind of smile that 4-year-olds produce without self-consciousness or calculation. A smile that had no agenda except gladness, and it landed on Alice somewhere she had not expected, somewhere just beneath her breastbone, and stayed there. The first week was a study in quiet negotiation. Alice turned the garden beds and banked them with straw against the coming frost. She repaired the curtains. They had come down because one of the rings had broken, a 10-minute fix, and rehung them. And the kitchen was transformed by this small act in a way that was almost embarrassing, as though the room had been holding its breath and could now let it out. She inventoried the pantry and wrote a list for the store in Silver City. She found, at the back of the top shelf, a small tin that held a woman's sewing things, a silver thimble, 3 spools of thread, a card of buttons, and she put the tin back without disturbing it and did not mention it. She understood about the things that were not to be mentioned. May followed her through the house like a small, solemn shadow for the first 3 days, watching everything Alice did with her gray eyes, and asking questions that were sometimes practical, and sometimes theological, and sometimes simply strange. On the 4th day she stopped watching and started helping, handing Alice the clothespins and holding the end of the string, and announcing the names of the chickens with the certainty of a person who expects you to remember them. "That one is Henrietta," May said, pointing to a large and self-satisfied hen. That one is also Henrietta. 2 Henriettas, Alice said. I ran out of names, May explained with perfect dignity. Gideon heard this from the woodpile and made a sound that was almost a laugh, almost, the way his expressions always came close to things but did not quite complete them. Alice filed it away. She was filing a great many things away. The way he checked the latch on the door twice before he came inside each night. The way he always gave May the largest portion and took whatever was left without comment. The way he had, she discovered, been teaching himself to braid hair from some memory of watching it done and was not very good at it yet, and May did not mind. The shelf he had started building beside the hearth, she could see the notches cut in the upright log where it was meant to go, and had not finished. She did not ask about the shelf. She did not ask about a great many things. This was, she had learned, its own form of courtesy. At the end of the second week, a man named Trask Faber rode out from Silver City with 2 hands behind him and a survey map and a voice like a man who had practiced sounding reasonable for many years. He asked to speak with Gideon at the gate, which Alice thought was interesting. Most men who meant you well walked up to the porch. She was hanging wash, and she did not stop. She heard enough. Faber was representing a land company out of Portland that had acquired the water rights to Sable Creek some miles upstream, and they were, he said reasonably, pleasantly, looking to consolidate the valley properties for a grazing cooperative, and they were prepared to offer Gideon a fair price, and he hoped Gideon would take a few days to consider. Gideon's answer was brief. Alice could not hear the words, but she recognized the tone, the flat, unhurried register of a man who has considered everything he needs to consider and is done. Faber rode out. He did not look back. Gideon came up to the porch and stood there a moment. Alice finished pegging the last shirt and turned. "Company?" she said. "An offer." He looked out at the road where the dust was still settling. "Second one in 6 months. Will they come back?" "They always come back," he said. She studied him. There was something in the set of his shoulders she had not seen before. Not fear, exactly, and not anger, but the weight of a man carrying a thing alone that he had been carrying alone for too long. She understood that weight. "You should know," she said carefully, "that I can write a letter. If you need someone to write to a lawyer or a county office, I have done it before." He looked at her. The gray eyes were direct and a little surprised, the way a man looks when someone hands him a tool he did not know he needed. "You have?" The Dunhams were not the first placement, she said, and did not elaborate, and he did not press. He said, "I will keep that in mind." It was not nothing. From Gideon Holt, she was beginning to understand. Nothing was never nothing. November arrived with a hard freeze that glazed the creek and drove the chickens into their collective displeasure, and brought May indoors for days at a stretch, which May addressed by becoming intensely interested in everything Alice did at the cook stove, and asking questions at a pace that would have exhausted a lesser woman. Alice answered every one of them. She taught May how to roll biscuit dough with her small hands, and how to tell when the fire needed feeding by the sound of it, and she told her stories about the places she had lived, not the hard parts, but the places themselves, the way the Boise River looked at flood, the way the desert smelled before rain, and May listened with the focused intensity of a child building a world out of words. Gideon sometimes came in from the barn and sat at the table and listened too, and said nothing, and Alice was careful not to look at him when she felt him watching. Then, on a gray Tuesday the second week of November, May woke with a fever. It was not the kind of fever that made you scream for the doctor in the night. It was the other kind, the low, persistent kind that made a child's eyes go glassy and her small hands go hot and her voice go quiet. Alice had seen both kinds. She knew the difference. She kept her voice steady and her movements certain, the way she had learned that a calm body in a room could sometimes talk a frightened one down from the ledge of panic. Gideon was frightened. He did not show it the way most men did. He showed it by becoming very still and very controlled, and by looking at May with an expression that was almost more than Alice could bear to see on a person's face. She put him to work. She sent him for cool water from the well. She sent him for the extra blankets from the chest. She gave him things to carry and things to fetch and things to do, because she knew that a man with no task in a sick room will either get in the way or fall apart, and Gideon Holt was too good a man for either. She sat with May through the day and through the long evening, cooling her face and coaxing broth between her lips and singing, very quietly, the songs she remembered from her own childhood, plain songs, homely songs, the kind without much poetry but with a great deal of persistence, which is sometimes what a fever needs. Around midnight, May's temperature broke. She sighed a deep, rattling sigh, and her body went slack in the particular way that meant sleep rather than distress, and Alice let out the breath she had been half holding since morning. Gideon was in the chair beside the bed. He had been there for hours. He looked at his daughter sleeping, and then he looked at Alice, and he said nothing at all, which was the most he had ever said to her. Alice stood and straightened her skirt and said quietly, "She will be herself by morning. She will probably want cornbread." "With honey," he said. "With honey," Alice agreed, and went to put the kettle on. She did not cry until she was alone in the lean-to, in the dark, with the wind off the ridge making its long sound against the logs. She was not sure what she was crying for precisely. Not fear. The fear was done. Perhaps it was something else. Perhaps it was the strange, unexpected weight of being needed, and the equally strange weight of having stayed. She wiped her face and lay down and listened to the house settle around her in the cold, and it sounded, she thought, less like a house holding its breath than a house breathing. Faber came back in the first week of December, as Gideon had predicted, and he did not come alone. He brought a man from Portland named Eldridge who wore a good coat, and carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting what he had come for, and they stood at the porch rail and spoke in the language of deadlines and legal instruments and county assessors, and the upshot of it was plain enough. If Gideon did not sell by the first of the year, Eldridge's company intended to pursue the water diversion they had the rights to pursue, and Sable Creek would be redirected into the company's consolidated irrigation system. And without water, the Holt property would be, as Eldridge put it with his reasonable voice and his good coat, unworkable. Alice had written the letter to the county land office the week before. She had also written to a lawyer in Boise City that she knew of, not personally but by reputation, a man named Carr, who had handled 3 similar cases against the Pacific Land Consortium the previous year, and had won 2 of them. She stood in the kitchen and she listened through the window, and when she heard the direction the conversation was taking, she took the 2 letters from the shelf above the hearth, folded and sealed and addressed and ready, and she came out onto the porch. Gideon looked at her. Eldridge looked at her. Faber looked at her with a particular species of dismissal that she had seen on a great many faces over the years and had stopped being stung by. She said to Gideon, "These have been ready since last week. The stage goes through on Thursday." She held the letters out. He took them. He looked at them once and then looked at Eldridge, and there was something in Gideon's face then. Not anger, not heat, but a cold and absolute clarity, the kind that comes off a man who has made his decision and is not a man who changes his decisions. "Thursday," he said to Eldridge. "The letters go. You have until then to put this conversation behind you." Eldridge looked at the letters. He looked at Alice. He looked at Gideon. He said something about reconsideration and timelines, and then he and Faber rode back down the Sable Creek Road, and Alice watched them go from the porch, with her arms at her sides, and her heart beating harder than she preferred to admit. Gideon stood beside her. He was looking at the letters in his hand. "You wrote to Carr," he said. She was surprised. "You know him?" "I know of him." He turned the letters over. His jaw was a hard line. "You did not tell me." "I was not sure you would let me if I asked," she said honestly, "and I thought you needed them more than you needed to know about them." He was quiet for a moment that she could not quite read. Then he said, "Alice." It was the first time he had used her name. Not Miss Marin, not a title, just her name, spoken in a voice that was low and careful the way everything about him was careful. "It was not my place, perhaps," she said. "If you feel it was not my place." "It was your place," he said. "You are—" He stopped. He looked out at the road. He looked back at her. "You have made yourself a place here." She did not answer. She did not trust her voice entirely at that moment. He said, "90 days was what you offered." "Yes," she said. "December 21st, he said. "That is 90 days." "I know," she said. He turned to face her fully, which he did not often do. Usually he was angled slightly to the side, the way cautious people stand, giving themselves room. He was not angled now. He said, "I want to ask you something before then." "Before you decide." She waited. "The agency," he said slowly, "suggested, before they sent you, that what I needed was not a housekeeper, that given May and the property and the situation, a different arrangement might be more durable." He said the last word like a man reading from a document he did not entirely agree with but could not dispute. "I wrote back and said I would not ask a woman to enter into a bargain she hadn't chosen freely." "That was honorable of you," Alice said quietly. "I am asking now," he said, "not because of the property or the water rights or because it is practical, though it is practical." He paused. He looked at her with those flat, steady gray eyes that were not flat at all, she had learned. They were only still, the way deep water is still. "I am asking because May draws you pictures and hides them in your coat pocket. I am asking because the house is different with you in it. I am asking because when she was sick I could not have—" He stopped, started again. "I want you to stay, past 90 days. I want you to stay because you choose to, not because the bargain says." Alice looked at him for a long moment. The wind came down off the ridge. The bay horse moved in the paddock. From inside the house came the sound of May singing to herself, some tuneless song of her own composition. "There is something you should know," Alice said. "The agency did not send me, not willingly. I asked for the direction of your road. The woman at the desk wrote it on a scrap of paper and gave it to me herself, without being told to." He waited. "I came here," she said, "because the road went somewhere and I needed somewhere to go. I stayed because—" She stopped. She looked at her hands, then at him. "I stayed because May hid a drawing in my coat pocket on the 3rd day. It was a picture of a house with 4 people in it. I could not tell who the 4th one was. She told me," Gideon said, "that it was a dog." Alice laughed. It surprised her, a real laugh, unguarded and warm. "Does she want a dog?" "She wants everything," he said. "She wants a dog and a horse of her own and a cat and a shelf full of books and cornbread every day. She is not a modest child." The thing in the lines around his eyes that was adjacent to relief was there again, and this time it was adjacent to something else too, something that was not a smile, but was the beginning of one, genuine, a little uncertain, a little fearful, and more than a little hopeful. He said, "She brought me the form." Alice stilled. "Which form?" "The agency form, the one from your file." He reached into his coat. He produced it. She recognized the eagle seal at the top, the careful handwriting. She saw, at the bottom, below her own name, a mark she had not put there, a wobbly, determined X, pressed deep into the paper by a small hand that had gripped the pen too hard, and beside it, in large, unsteady letters, May. Alice looked at the form for a very long moment. She said, She cannot write her own name yet. I taught her last week, Gideon said. She wanted to sign something. She said she was signing for the family. Alice put her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were bright. She was not going to cry on the porch in December with Gideon Holt watching, and then she was, a little, at the corners, which she suspected he saw and suspected he would never mention. She said, when she could, "A family needs a shelf." He looked at her. "The one by the hearth," she said. "You cut the notches for it. It has been waiting since before I came. A shelf is not a difficult thing to build." "No," he said. He was looking at her the way the house had been looking, like something waiting to breathe. "It is not." "Then build it," Alice said, "and I will fill it." He put his hand out, the same as the first time, steady and honest and meaning what it said. She took it, and this time neither of them let go right away. The wind came down off the canyon, and the cottonwoods along the creek rattled their last leaves, and the bay horse stood in the paddock in the cold winter light, still and gold and entirely at peace. Inside, May sang her tuneless song. Carr's letters reached Boise City on the Thursday stage, and by February the county had opened an inquiry into the Portland Company's water right application. By April the inquiry had turned into a hearing, and by June the diversion was denied on the grounds that it would harm existing agricultural homesteads, of which the Holt property at Sable Creek was listed first. Eldridge and Faber did not come back. Alice built the shelf. Or rather, she held the boards while Gideon fitted them, and handed him the hammer when he needed it, and May sat on the kitchen table and directed operations with great authority and questionable accuracy. The shelf went up crooked by half an inch on one side. It was, Alice thought, the finest shelf she had ever seen. They were married in the Silver City Church on a Saturday in March, with Preacher Dowd officiating and the clerk's assistant, whose name was Rosa, Alice had learned, standing up for Alice, and May, wearing a white ribbon in her hair that she had chosen herself from the dry goods store, with the gravity of a person making an important decision. May stood between them at the altar and held one hand of each, which was not precisely how the ceremony was meant to go, but Preacher Dowd had the good sense to let it stand. When Dowd asked if anyone had objections, May said, clearly and for the whole church to hear, "I already signed the form." There was laughter, the warm, uncomplicated laughter of people who are glad, and Gideon looked at Alice over their daughter's head, and there it was at last, the smile, whole and unhesitating, the one she had been waiting for since November. She kept the agency form. She put it on the shelf, folded once along its crease, beside a small tin of sewing things and a jar of honey and a book of stories she had brought from her traveling trunk. The form with the eagle seal and the careful notation and May's determined, oversized signature at the bottom, "Unsuitable for children." She thought of it sometimes, years later, when May climbed into her lap with a book or came running in from the yard with a question about why the sky was one color and the earth another. She thought of it and found she could not, any longer, imagine what the word had been meant to mean. You never know what a piece of paper might overlook. The agency clerk saw a woman who had spoken the truth to a boy who needed to hear it, and wrote down a word that fit in a small box. He did not see the cornbread and the honey. He did not see the curtains rehung. He did not see the shelf going up crooked and fine. He did not see a small hand gripping a pen too hard, signing for the family. A home is not built from paper. It is built from biscuits in the pan before sunrise and cool water in a fever night, and letters written and held ready, and a hand that means what it says when it reaches out. It is built from every small and sturdy act of staying. May knew it at 4 years old, which is perhaps how children see what the rest of us need time to learn. If this story settled in your heart the way it settled in ours, we would love to hear from you. What was the moment you believed Alice belonged there? Was it the cornbread, the letters, or the form with May's name on it? Tell us in the comments. And if you would like more stories of ordinary people building extraordinary lives on the frontier, subscribe and stay close. There are many more journeys where this one came from. Good night. God bless you and those who belong to you.